pronounce my name perfectly fine. And thanks for the organizer for inviting me to give this review talk. And this has been a very nicely organized conference with many interesting results. And they actually asked me to give a general review of what the high energy emission and very high energy emission we see from compact objects, from galactic compact objects. So basically what I decided is to first give you a general overview of these compact objects, which one we see and what kind of scenario we are facing. And then I'll go over the different population and tell you what is the state of the art of the information we obtain from them based on the high energy and the very high energy emission we see. So for that, let me just start very simple with a massive star, okay? I'm going to start talking about these compact objects, but for that, I want to start talking about this massive star, which in principle, it shouldn't accelerate charged particles to high energies at all, because you don't have shock, you don't have anything really exciting happening. But the next question you can ask yourself is if the massive star is in a binary system. If that's the case, then you might wonder if this is a compact companion. So if it's not a compact companion, there is another possibility that you have another massive star, and then or a bunch of massive stars all together in a cluster. In that case, you might have emission coming from colliding wind system or the combined effect of the winds of the stars. This is something like we see, for instance, in Eta Carina or in systems like Westerlund 1 and Westerlund 2. Otherwise, if you have a compact companion, you have good chances to get gamma rays. And the next question, if it's a neutron star. If it's a neutron star, then you can have a look at the companion and think, okay, what kind of companion it is. If it's a massive one, a Wolf-Rayet or O or B star with a disk, then you might end up with a system like 1259, in which you have a pulsar, which is moving across the star wind and upscattering these photons and producing very efficiently gamma rays, modulated gamma rays. Otherwise, it might not be this massive, but there is another possibility that you have this kind of a low mass companion. And then you can end up in this kind of low mass X-ray binary, which are kind of very interesting objects because sometimes they behave like pulsars, sometimes behave like X-ray binaries, like the case of 1270 or 1023. Otherwise, if it's not a neutron star, it could be something compact, but not so compact like a neutron star, like a white dwarf. In this case, this is kind of surprisingly detected by Fermilab, and they actually see many of these type of different symbiotics and many of these kind of systems in which you have a kind of a nova explosion or a mini supernova in which you can accelerate particles in the shocks up to the GeV-TeV energies. And if this is not the case, then there is another possibility that you have radio jets. And in that case, you might have this black hole, a galactic black hole, which is powering jets, and then you have a microquasar like Cygnus X1, Cygnus X3, those guys. Otherwise, the massive star is just standing there. Nothing cool happens until it explodes as a supernova remnant. Then when this happens, a whole new plethora of things accelerating high energies and very high energies can be happening. Of course, if the neutron star remains, you might, if pointing in the right direction, you're going to see part emission coming from the pulsar. Otherwise, you can also see the shell itself, the matter swapping the interstellar medium around and producing very high energies and very high energies by accelerating particles here, charged particles in the shock. Otherwise, you can also see if the pulsar is young enough or the system is young enough, you can see this composite supernova remnants in which we actually see everything. We can see emission from the shock, from the pulsar, and also from the pulsar wind, from the bubble the pulsar is producing, the bubble of particles the pulsar is injecting in the surrounding. And when it's old enough, then you have what you can also have the pulsar and also the relic pulsar wind nebulae, which is a huge bubble of electrons and positrons, which are produced at very, very bright at TeV energies. So this is more or less in a nutshell, what we see at very high and high energies when we talk about compact objects in the galaxy. So all these guys, they have huge gravitational fields and magnetic and electric fields. You have shocks, you have dense material, you have all the things that you need to accelerate electrons and positrons and cosmic rays to very high energies. Basically, you need to accelerate up to a few TeV, up to 100, more than 100 TeVs. So the kind of radiation, this is probably you're all very familiar with them. We actually see synchrotron curvature for electrons in magnetic field. This is particularly relevant in the X-ray domain. But if the field is strong enough, like in the case of pulsars, then the emission goes up to the 100 MeV GeV energies. Those electrons also, when you have high energy electrons, they can upscatter in photon fields, far infrared, CMB, or the near infrared, and this is extremely efficient in the TeV range to produce gamma rays here. And this is something which we see very often in binaries, in pulsar with nebulae, and in pulsars indeed. And also those electrons, if they are in a dense field, they can also produce gamma rays through Stellar emission. And finally, the competitive mechanism to produce gamma rays is just using when you have accelerated cosmic rays to very high energies, and then they interact with some molecular clouds around, and they produce pions, neutral pions and charged pions. The neutral pions, they quickly decay in gamma-gamma, which reproduce actually the spectrum of the primary, and the charged pions decay in neutrinos, which you can actually use as another messenger for deriving information from the same object. And this is especially particularly important for supernova remnants, for diffuse emission, etc. So this is more or less the radiation we see, the objects, and the mechanism we observe. So this is what I want to tell you now. I start talking about the pulsars as a population of pulsars. Then I will show you a few examples of these individual pulsar, how they behave when they vary, when they have this variable emission. And then I also want to tell you some results where we see with pulsar with nebulae and supernova remnants. So I think it's fair to say that the largest population of pulsars at high energy is being provided by the LAT detector on board of the Fermi satellite. And this is a bit outdated plot, but right now I think the number is around 200 pulsars detected at high energies. And they show a large phenomenology to just different pulsars of different flavors and different behaviors. So here, for instance, you see the location of some of them. In orange and red are the radio quiet and radio loud pulsars, which are kind of close to the galactic plane because they're young and they're close to the place they were born. And then the green ones are actually millisecond pulsar, which are also surprisingly detected, many of them at the GeV domain. So many of them have been, the majority of them, they've been discovered through the timing features. And then for that, you do the phase folding, either using X-rays or radio, especially radio timing solutions. But they also developed very successful technique based in blind periodicity search, like these guys here. And in many other cases, they have unidentified sources with the right spectral shape, and then there was radio searches and find the pulsar power in the high energy source. So if you look at the population, you have the young pulsars and the millisecond pulsar, which are actually showed here. This is the PP dot diagram. In black, they are all the radio pulsars, and this is the young, and this is the millisecond pulsar. So basically, what we see is these pulsars, they're bright, they have a high rotational energy power, the order of 10 to the, like, I don't see for it here, but it's kind of high. But this is probably a selection effect given by only the sensitivity of the LAT detector. The magnetic field is of the order 10 to the 11, 10 to the 14, and then we see more or less 23% of the known pulsars. On the other hand, on the other side of the diagram, you have these pulsars. They kind of span up, span down, and then they're going to die unless there is a companion. The companion is aggregating matter into the pulsar and letting it spinning up faster, and they end up around here. So these guys, because they old, the magnetic field are smaller or fainter, is of the order 10 to the 8, 10 to the 11. And we basically see a lot of them. They are really efficient in producing gamma rays. And this is just based in what we think we understand now how the gamma ray emission is produced. So basically, you have this magnet and it's rotating, and then it's producing enormous magnetic and electric fields, pulling a charge and filling the magnetosphere. Some regions in the magnetosphere, the electrons and positrons, they are able to escape and produce gaps. And in these gaps, you have a drop of potential in which this charged particle can be accelerated following the magnetic field lines. And then when they accelerate, they lose energy by synchrotron and curvature radiation, depending where they are in the trajectory. So if the potential drop is very far, is very large, then you have a lot of acceleration, and these electrons, they also produce, the photon, they also produce cascading. And depending on the cascading, you're going to have a screen up radiation or not. Where the gap is and how the gap is defines different model and more or less, but what we understand from the light curves and from the spectrum is the emission seems to be producing very close to the light for the light cylinder, or even beyond the light cylinder. And that explains many things that we observe here. Of course, keep in mind there's a lot of dispersion in this plot, but if you look at here, this is the luminosity in gamma rays, and this is the spin down power, and this is efficiency. And that would be the line if there is no screening at all, and this is the screened line. So it looks a bit like they are following this line, especially the young ones, because the potential drop is higher, and then you have a lot of cascading. Actually, the young pulsars seems to be more efficient when they're slower, meaning the potential drop is not that large, you have less screening, and then you can still accelerate more. That also has implication in the millisecond pulsars, because the millisecond pulsars, because they spin very fast, the magnetosphere is very compact. So when you get to the light cylinder, the magnetic field is low in general, but when you get to the light cylinder, because the magnetosphere is compact, the magnetic field is still very high. So that makes them very efficient in producing gamma rays. And this is what we actually see. And some other interesting thing about these pulsars and the spectrum of pulsars, when you have a lot of statistics, you can do very nicely spectroscopy. And actually, what we see in the bright guys is that the spectrum is not it doesn't decay exponentially as you would expect by the maximum energy of the particles or by simply the cascading of the particle. But what we see is actually they decay in a sub-exponential manner. And that allows us, at the TV regime, to detect at least 2 of them so far. So we have Vela, which was detected by the Hess telescope, and then you see how the spectrum is going up to the 100 GeV, kind of a slow falling off. That could be actually explained by different population of electrons at different altitudes. And then when you add all the contributions, then you can have this kind of softening of the spectrum. There is also the case of the Crab pulsar. You know, Crab, the more you look, the less you understand, because you get better data. And we actually detect TV emission from this guy. The emission in the beginning is 10 up to 400 GeV, and lately we saw it going up to more than 1,000 GeV. This indeed cannot be explained by synchrotron radiation, but then you need to have something like inverse quantum from secondary, or even going a bit beyond and think about different structures of pulsars. This is, for instance, some new relativistic MST simulation in when they try to understand how the current goes around the pulsar and the pulsar wind. So let me just go into one of some example of this pulsar in particular. There are some of them that they actually vary. The emission we see is variable. And they could be because they are in binary system. That's the case, for instance, of this interesting object. This is transitional millisecond pulsar, in which you actually start seeing different states. You have one state in which a pulsar is building a magnetosphere, and then it's acting like a normal pulsar. And so you see in radio and in gamma rays. And it's got a second state in which it's always a fight between the field and the gravitational power. So in this other state, basically the accretion disk goes over the magnetosphere and starts injecting matter on the polar cap of the pulsar, and then you start seeing bright X-ray bars and X-ray pulsation, which is basically due to the accretion of the accretion disk on the pulsar. And then there is an intermediate state in which you build up magnetosphere, but you still have the disk around. And in that case, the X-ray pulse is very much reduced. You have a subluminous accretion disk, but you have a bright gamma ray emission. So when you look at when you look at the GV, this is two very nice cases of this kind of object. You have 1023, which basically was off, and then it went into propeller state, and then you saw how the emission went up when the magnetosphere builds up, and then you can start accelerating electrons and positrons and probably producing self-synchrotron emission with the matter around the disk or the intrashock between the two stars. This is another example. In this case, it's very nice because also it goes the other way. It was high, and then it basically went off. There is also the high energy gamma rays, which are also bright in GV and TV. Those guys, I don't think I have much time to talk about them, just to say they show different phenomenology too, and in general, what you see is the modulation of the emission with the orbit. This is another guy. It's a very interesting emission too. This is actually isolated pulsars, and you have to think pulsars, they also vary at the radio, and the low energy part, you see many variations. This is 2021, and then what they saw is like after a glitch, there was a drop of 20% in the flux, and also a change in the characteristic of the spectrum. And that was thought to be basically a change in the glitch, basically changed the inclination angle, and the whole magnetosphere was kind of shake and restructure. And this is what they saw here. So, and there's another guy, which is again, I go back to Crab. But in that case, it's not the pulsar which is the one which is producing flares or varying. It's actually the nebula. When you remove the pulsar contribution, what you see is the nebula is actually flaring. And this is, you see, they saw this kind of wave, and then this is happening recurrently. The pulsar is actually, the nebula is actually producing this kind of super powerful flares in a kind of compact region, because it lasted only like 9, 10 hours. It doesn't last that much. So this is something which we're trying to understand. It might be reconnection. It might be something happening within the nebula. So these two guys, I'm going to skip two because I only have 5 minutes, and I want to go into my favorite object, the Pulsar nebulae, which is the largest population at the TV energy. So we actually know we're starting to do kind of population studies of Pulsar nebula, because we have many of them. No matter where you look, whenever you have a young energetic pulsar, there is very large chances that this is a Pulsar nebula around it at the TV energies. So, and that actually the field develops pretty fast. Until 2004, we basically had one Pulsar nebula in the TV energy. Then we did the first galactic plane survey in the inner part of the galaxy, and we got a number of them. The extension of the galactic plane survey moved them, increased the number of a bit more, and then with the contribution of all the Cherenkov telescope, MAGIC, Veritas, and HESS, we have now around 40 Pulsar nebulae. This is the galactic plane survey done by HESS. This was presented at the ICRC. There is also a contribution by Eve and Amanda that you can go and check too. But basically with this very uniform survey, we can start doing unbiased population studies of partial wave nebulae. So what we saw actually is like, well, they all related to very bright and young pulsars. And what we see also is more or less, if you do a time-dependent modeling, taking into account like normal assumptions and let them vary into the reasonable values, the partial wave nebula, they follow what we expect them to follow. But still, there is a large dispersion. And the large dispersion depends very much where they're located and what is the photon field that they actually see. Basically, the emission you see is this energetic electrons upscattering a photon field. So this is the distribution of the partial wave nebulae. And when you see many of them are sitting actually at this distance. Just keep in mind, we also have, when we look in the TV, we have some bias, observational bias because of the size of these guys. They have to have the right size. If they're very close by, you would see it would be too big to enter in the camera. If they are too far, the flash will be too low. So basically what you see is these guys between 2 and 5 kiloparsecs. But many of them, they seem to be sitting in this scutum arm, which is kind of a secondary arm. But this seems to have a lot of star formation region and H2 region, so it might be some correlation with that. We can just do this exercise to put the photon field here with the spin down energy, and more or less it works as you expect. This is the non-detected one, this is the detected ones in red, but still there is some guys which they're still bright or they're still not detected when you would expect to detect them. If you look at them in case by case, one thing that we actually can do is that we have a very good, well, they're extended. We can resolve it, and then we can actually see the particle propagation and acceleration, how it's happening. And moreover, you see a very good correlation with the X-rays. So that means you can do studies of the spectral energy distribution one by one, because you see the same population accelerated at the same time. This is the case, for instance, in MS1552. There's been a couple of nice talk about this. And then what we see in TV is very much correlated with the shape in the X-rays. Something when we do that and we try to model the emission, we see the magnetic field is in general pretty low. It's the order of a few microgauss. So that tells us those guys are very much particle dominated. So there's far from energy partition, and the energy seems to go into particles. We also see this high photon field density. You need to boost the far infrared a bit when you want to do the modeling of the spectral energy distribution. And something else that we also see is normally the pulsar is offset with respect to the TV and the center of the TV emission. So that could be explained either by the pulsar moving away with the proper velocity if it's pointing to the right direction and not towards you, or basically you have this kind of explosion in a inhomogeneous region, and then they makes the supernova to explode at different velocity, and then also the reverse shock to modify the partial wave nebula. So, but something more important is also just to keep in mind is this: they are very extended, and they are very extended at very different distance. So this, what I did is put these 4 big samples. This is Vela X, this is 1552, 1825, and this is Geminga. Geminga is a simulation I did. The real detection is here by Hawk. This huge guy is 2-3 degrees, a big kind of faint, and you can hear probably this afternoon more about those guys. But basically, when you look at them, you can start thinking what we're actually looking at each of them. So the exercise I did is I put them all, I simulate the flux of them using this CTA simulation tools. This is 100 hours, and I put them all at 250 kiloparsecs. Then you actually see which part of the nebula we are observing, what we see in the TV regime. So this is actually the real size we measure, and this is the real size they have when you project in the distance we measured. So you see guys like 1825, which is actually enormous. It's got like 70 parsecs. And that would be this guy here. So if you look at Villa X, for instance, Villa X is pretty close by, and it looks big, but in reality, just looking at the 1, 2 parsecs away from the pulsar. So just looking at the very fresh injected electrons. If you look 1552, which looks very small, but if you put it in context, it's pretty large too. And then you're looking at the 10 parsecs around the pulsar. Even Geminga, which looks so big, in reality, if you compare it to the other guys, it's not that big. It's as big as it should be, looking at its age and looking at the distance it is. So in the case in 1825, it's this huge guy, they have a very old guy, and then one of the things, very nice thing about 1825 is that we actually can see how the particles cool when they travel away from the pulsar. I'm super off time. So yeah, I think I wanted to tell you a bit of supernova remnants, but I think I'm totally off. Just give me 2 minutes. Remnants, well, we also heard a very nice review previously. This is the typical, all the regions. Remnants, you have, you can accelerate gamma rays and different, they are very complicated objects. So you can see gamma rays coming from the forward shock, gamma rays coming from the reverse shock, which actually have very different properties. So you can have amplified magnetic field here, and very dense medium, and low magnetic field here, and ejecta medium, very faint. You can also have emission from clouds which are in the forward shock, which have been reaccelerated, or with some clouds which are in the surrounding of the remnant, and they are illuminated by cosmic rays escape. So basically, one of the most important things in remnants is that they are the relation with cosmic rays. So since I don't have much time, just want to say a couple of words about the population. And basically, it seems like at GeV, there are many of them, there is protons in supernova remnants. They accelerate cosmic rays. They give the right energetics, and everything looks all right. When you look at the TV regime, instead, we don't see these P-Vatron accelerators. So basically, we see some of them which have low magnetic field, so they're not so keen in accelerated cosmic rays anymore. And then we start actually seeing this cutoff. The guys that we actually see, they have a high magnetic field, and they could accelerate cosmic rays. We started to see this energy cutoff at a few 2 or 3 TV. So where the P-Vatron, this is something we're still looking for, and then we're still trying to, it's one of the big questions in the TV astronomy. But one of the possibilities is to look around the remnants to see the escape particles, or to look some of the objects like the galactic center, or see some of these clouds which might catch these cosmic rays. So I'm finished here. I'll leave you my summary, and I really apologize for the part.
All right. Thank you so much for a great talk. Don't need to rush. So anybody have any questions? Okay, I actually have a question. So you said in, I think it was MSH 1552, that you had to increase the photon field or when you were modeling. How significantly more do you have to increase it from what you would standardly assume in the in basic environments? And is this common in only this remnant, or this pulsar wind nebula, or over the population?
It's actually a lot more. So normally you would have 0.25 the CMB electron volts per centimeter cube, and this is, you always use CMB because it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But when you do the modeling, like detail, using the reverse shock, everything modeling, you really need to put it like at the level of 4, 5 electron volts per centimeter cube. And this is actually very uncomfortable high. And it happens to almost all the pulsar wind nebulae we actually looked at. So it might be also that we are overlooking something in the evolution, because we just assuming some linear relation with in the parameters. But or it might be that it was more efficient in the beginning of the time, and now it's slowing down. That also might happen. When you do it like simply, you really need to increase, and it's pretty uncomfortable actually.
Any more questions? Over there.
Hi, very nice overview over the whole energy bands. The question here, so at the very beginning you showed a slide with this zoo of sources in there, and there were a number which we see with the LAT, like high mass X-ray binaries, pulsars. We don't see any low mass X-ray binary in the GeV band. So the question is, are we gonna ever see low mass X-ray binaries at GeV energies? Is it just a question of sensitivity of the instrument? Or is there no emission mechanism, even though we have huge gravitational fields, electromagnetic fields, and so forth?
Well, you mean like, I think what we actually see is the transient ones. The one that when you are in the propeller, oh, am I here? There. These guys. What we actually see is the transitional ones. But I think if you just think in the low mass X-ray binary as the one that they don't transition, let's say you just have the matter ejecting in the neutron star, I don't see how you can produce non-thermal radiation from this. This is basically thermal radiation into the neutron star. So I don't think you easily see these guys.
But you see hard X-rays, right? That's not really thermal.
You mean like in the low mass X-ray binaries?
Yes.
Yeah, but what's the maximum energy you see in those guys?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you could have some kind of feedback, and then if the flux goes back and then it goes up and try to get into the corona, into the ejecta, it's some kind of acceleration in that sense. But I don't really see how you can see this emission. But you never know. It's always
okay, thank you.
Present.
Any more questions? Okay, if not, thank Emma for a wonderful overview talk.